Well, let's continue with the situation in Gaza. Achim Steiner is the head of the United Nations Development Programme. Achim Steiner, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Before we get to the very detail, and it is crucial detail, of what lies ahead, how relieved are you that we appear to have reached this moment of the ceasefire after so many efforts?
Well, I think like anyone, first of all, in Gaza, in Israel, in the whole region, but across the world, who has been following this conflict for 15 months, I think it is a moment of extraordinary anticipation and perhaps relief in the sense that, yes, let's see if on Sunday the guns stop, the killing stops, the dying stops. So in that sense, yes, it's an extraordinarily important moment.
Tell me about the immediate relief efforts that you're involved with.
Well, as the Secretary General in his statement highlighted, the United Nations, with its multiple agencies from UNICEF to the World Food Programme, our emergency relief coordinator, and some of you will remember seeing the images of hundreds of trucks now being lined up to bring in humanitarian supplies. The first priority is food. It is medical supplies. It is essentially addressing an extraordinary, desperate situation. And that first phase to being able to scale up that humanitarian support takes precedence over everything else. What we are also doing as part of the United Nations response with the United Nations Development Programme and other institutions is to also think about early recovery, and I can speak to that in a moment.
Yes, and I will come to that in a moment, but we're seeing pictures of people actually just getting some of the aid that has been distributed, but so little has got in, so much is needed. Tell me about the need in your assessment, where you will focus, first of all, how you will actually try to do this.
Well, I think in terms of the distribution, the first priority is access and security. What we have seen over the last few months is not only enormous restrictions being imposed on the international community in providing basic humanitarian relief. Those trucks that are loaded in their hundreds have food. This is addressing an issue that has become not only chronic but acute: malnutrition, people literally starving, no access to medicines, medical facilities having been destroyed, and equipment. So all of these are, in a sense, the elements that literally overnight can be brought in and can significantly change the conditions under which people are trying to survive at the moment. The second step is obviously where we are looking at early recovery. We're looking at the public and social infrastructure. As many of your listeners will know, I mean, much of the infrastructure across the whole of Gaza has been destroyed or damaged, whether it is buildings, shelter where people live, but also basic infrastructure to do with sanitation. There is no public and solid waste management, access to clean water. We have been ready to bring in a significant number of solar-powered water treatment plants to be able to restore healthy drinking water. And from there on, we have to address issues such as rubble. Unbelievable amounts of rubble from this destruction are currently preventing people from being able to return, both because they cannot get back to their houses or the places they used to live, but also in that rubble is unexploded ordnance, very dangerous. Clearing 42 million tons of rubble, that is the estimate at the moment, would be another early recovery step. And then shelter rehabilitation, employment opportunities, allowing people to have a chance to earn a livelihood again. All this is part of an early recovery strategy before we start talking about reconstruction, which would then really be the project that would have to follow.
You were talking about rubble and we're seeing some of the pictures, but when you look at some of the aerial pictures, mile after mile, of the sort of destruction we've seen, you'll be familiar, just like our viewers. How will you actually go about trying to actually move all of that rubble? I mean, what are you actually anticipating, even in the timescale of that sort of operation?
Well, sadly, we have some experience from the past, including in Gaza, from past conflicts. So critical is, first of all, the ability to remove the threat of unexploded ordnance. You know, the very workers who would clear the path and would take the rubble away need to be sure that they do not suddenly themselves become victims of ordnance that has not exploded. Landmines, but also bombs that are still there. What we urgently would need is equipment, because that quantity of rubble requires heavy machinery in order to be able to move it. Already in the last few months, UNDP has been working in Gaza to address the issue of solid waste management. We have worked with local communities, the local organizations, on moving over 220,000 tons of solid waste, which is a health hazard And in that sense, we have the capacity. We have also, with obviously many people in Gaza looking for ways of gaining paid employment, the opportunity to rapidly scale up this operation. But it is crucial that access to Gaza with equipment, supplies, and finance is provided. Otherwise, we cannot do that.
And also, there's got to be security for all those things that you're talking about. And I mean, there are so many challenges because we have details of the first 42 days of this first phase of a ceasefire, but everything after that is rather more vague. And you're talking about a time frame that goes way beyond those 6 weeks. So when do we get to the stage where you're talking about reconstruction? What is the timeline on that? Who does it? Who pays for it?
All very valid questions. And what I can share with you is that UNDP, with a program of assistance to the Palestinian people, has been cooperating with the Palestinian Authority, the international community, and the United Nations family also over the last few months. We have done a series of assessments. There are priority areas that would be the first steps in terms of early recovery and then also planning for reconstruction. But let me remind you, we are talking here about 2 million people and an entire economy essentially having been destroyed. We are talking about decades of development that have been lost. So it will have to go in phases. It will be very complex, and it will certainly take years, if not decades, to get back to where perhaps Gaza was 2 to 3 years ago. But, the most important thing right now is to ensure that the ceasefire holds, that security is in place, that the international community is able to step up with its support, and that we are working with the international community to provide the inputs that are needed. This is not a logistical or financial impossibility, but it is obviously determined, first of all, by the political readiness of all parties to cooperate. Security has to be obviously in place, and then we need to mobilize financing for certainly Gaza on an unprecedented scale, and that will depend on the generosity and the wisdom of the international community, and let us also be honest, a humanitarian solidarity.
Achim Steiner from the United Nations Development Programme, thank you for taking time to speak to us here on BBC News. We're grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthew.